Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters Podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. Hey folks, my guest on the podcast today is a truly inspiring woman. Sometimes these are really my favorite episodes where we are zooming outside of our normal sphere of first responders and kind of tipping the hat to our men and women who do incredible jobs on the front line. And not only the work they do on deployment and in training, but sometimes the scars, memories, experiences that they bring back with them, and the sometimes long-term effects that can have on their physical and mental well-being. My guest today is Liz McConaghy. Liz was the youngest serving female crewman on the Royal Air Force Chinook fleet, spanning a 17-year career flying the aircraft. Originally from Northern Ireland, she attended RAF Cranwell on her 19th birthday, joined as soon as she could, to begin her exciting career thereafter on Chinook Helicopters. She was the youngest aircrew to deploy to Iraq, aged just 21, and also the only female crewman on the Chinook wing for 4 years. So her story is a completely unique one here, folks, a real trailblazer. Her career saw her amass 2 deployments to Iraq and 10 deployments to Helmand Afghanistan in support of Operation Herrick, which gave her an insightful and very personal perspective on war. The good, the bad, and the ugly. After leaving the RAF in 2019, things really shifted gears. It's always like moving off a speeding train, and Liz's life slowly began to unravel after a series of traumatic events that compounded her PTSD. This unfortunately led to her trying to end her life in August of 2020. And today we're going to be talking about so much of how she found herself in that position and saw that as the only way out. So often in conversations like this, you start to realize that sometimes people didn't want it to end completely. They just wanted the feeling to end. Suicide is such a morbidly fascinating, strange, scary subject to talk about. So just a little bit of a heads up for people, for the listeners, about the context of our conversation today. Clearly, having her on a guest today, she did survive this and went into the veterans' mental health care system to help her deal with her demons and finally lay the images she had seen on the battlefield to rest. During this time, she began writing poetry and subsequently an autobiography to help her get her thoughts out of her head and onto the page. Chinook Crew Chick was released in September 2022 and went to Amazon bestseller within 3 weeks. It's a fantastic book, folks. There is links in the bottom of here and we'll reference it several times through. It's an honest and humorous account of her best of times and worst of times, and how her experiences flying the Chinook have changed and molded her into the woman she has become. From dodging bullets to saving soldiers and witnessing the brutality and loss of war, she writes about how she found herself bringing the battlefield right home with her, despite theoretically her days of fighting being over. Liz's story really offers hope to those who have also found themselves in the darkest of places, or maybe you find yourself in that very place right now. Maybe you've stumbled across this whilst you are contemplating challenges you have going on in your life. Maybe you're looking for the tools within yourself. Maybe you're looking tools from other people to help rebuild a pathway to a new life. Maybe you're looking through that telescope to see if there is light at the end of the tunnel and it is not just a dark cave of abyss. Liz is now an ambassador for mental health and specifically PTSD with veterans. Liz stands as a shining example that PTSD does not have to be your identity. It can simply be a chapter of your life that can be learned from and, most importantly, recovered from. Since beginning her journey as a motivational speaker, Liz has won Defense Woman of the Year in 2023 and been nominated for Woman of the Year 2023. She is a gregarious, wonderful, beautiful, infectious, just magnetic personality, and I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I hope you do too, and I hope it gives you a snapshot into some of the challenges that she faced, but also to show you, as she rightly says herself, because she's still writing and she has probably some books coming out this year, if not next year, that this is just a chapter. This is one part of Liz's life. It is not her entire identity. It is not her entire life. And most importantly, through her own choices, it was not the end of her life. It's a real powerful conversation today, folks. Buckle up as we take flight with the one and only Liz McConaghy. I'll see you on the other side.
Swimming. I had an ear infection from the swimming pool at the start of January. I had COVID, then an ear infection, and then a throat infection, like off the back of one another. So I've just got level, which is just...
Swimming's a real ball ache for me. I love swimming, and I love how it's like really low impact for me. But it's such a frustration to get to do it, if you know what I mean, because I almost feel like there's more steps.
Yeah, it depends where your pool is. No, I did. Well, I used to do outdoor and I did triathlons, but now I just go inside because it's just so much, like you said, it's so much faff outside. But I'm a member of the village gym here, and it's really good because it's got a pool there, so you can pretty much go to the gym, smash out a workout, and then just piddle down the steps, and you're at the pool, which takes away all the faff.
I always talk about removing resistance, like friction, habitual friction. Yeah. Like if there's less steps to do the thing, then you're more likely to do the thing.
It's so true. However, 2 years ago, I moved from the gym around the corner. I literally have a Fitness First, like at the end of my road, and I moved from it to the one at the other side of town because it had a pool, and because my ex-husband goes to the village or the Fitness First. So I was like, right, I'm moving gyms, and now I have to drive past my old gym to go to my new one, and it's always really annoying because I'm like, it definitely takes more motivation to get there because you've got to drive a little bit further, but I still get there.
Well, I've got a really lovely home gym with the ice bath, and it's a big double garage, and it's matted out and all that sort of jazz. But I'm still a member of 2 other gyms because I'm such a fucking princess. Like, one of them's got a sauna and a swimming pool, but the other one's a CrossFit gym. So I like the social aspect sometimes to CrossFit. I like the fact that it pushes me and gets other people to push me and all this sort of shit. But I found if I just do any of one is too much. Like if I just do CrossFit, I end up injuring myself because my fucking ego just pushes me. And you can't do that shit every day.
Is there one at the station? Have you not got one at the station?
Oh yeah, there's gyms at the stations as well. There's gym at every single station. I don't like training at work. A, the gyms aren't very good. B, well, that's a lie actually. So I train in the afternoons, but that's literally just like 30 minutes cardio. So I'll either row or I'll run or I'll bike. And that's more like to help. I suppose it's a physical thing, but it's more a brain thing for me as well. Like I get 2 cracks a day then. And also because I work at a training department and also work at headquarters sometimes, it's a little bit, I don't think we're supposed to exist in those environments.
I guess for you guys, funny enough, I put a tweet out yesterday about whenever I got medically discharged, and someone said, were you not able to stay in and do a desk job? And I said, I did for like 3 weeks, and I watched Chinooks take off out the window, and I was like, I can't do this. This is not what I joined to do, and it's the same for you guys. Like, that's not what you joined to do, is it? So.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, we all know the working environment of a firefighter is filled with challenges. We face serious risks on the job, such as heat exhaustion, burns, physical and mental stress, and we frequently come into contact with high levels of toxic chemicals. Now, I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line, working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together. The whole aspect of, and I wonder this with promotion, like our minds aren't designed to work in these glass boxes in front of screens all the time. And there's something that walks hand in hand with success, and that's a funny word. Let's come back to that one in a second. Like as you progress through ranks and roles and management, stuff like that, sometimes the higher paying jobs, and I see this in military, like we had Brigadier Chris Murray on, we've had a wing commander on in the past, I've had a few military individuals on, and I said like, you know, lessons learned from promotion and stuff like this, and they were like, there's something called the Peter Principle, which is where you can get promoted beyond your ability, and it's finding where that station is for you, because sometimes the best soldiers and stuff and the best firefighters and the best police officers, the best paramedics, their mind doesn't, they're like kinesthetic people, like you said, sitting in the office looking out the window. I'm not good at that shit, and that's why, like, coming back to the first part, I have to have those midday breakups where I do something physical with my body, because there's something, I don't say animalistic, I'm not trying to beat my chest, but like, and I think that attributes to challenges with mental health, which like we subdue ourselves and try and encourage ourselves to stay in a glass box and say that you should be enjoying it.
I mean, this would be really good stuff for the podcast, but I think it's because you guys, NHS, police, and us as military, we all join because we have this thing like the seed to serve inside us. And none of us, I think it's fair to say, very few of us ever do it for the money. We do it because we've got that thing. We want to make a difference every day, and we want to get up in the morning, look in the mirror, go to bed at night and go, we fucking made a difference today. And if you're sat in a desk job, you just don't get that same, you might still be wearing the uniform, you might still be in the potential big role as, firefighter or in the military, but you're not making a difference to someone. And I think that's really, and that's where it goes wrong.
I think we deal well with short loops. So something you said there, I always say people join for the outcome, not the income, because we're not getting rich doing this shit. But you can close the loop really quickly. So what I mean is, like, we go to whatever, road traffic collision, there's chaos, we're there to create calm, put command and control in place, fix the problem, and then at the end of it, someone's packaged up, they're in an ambulance and off they go. Close loop. Now, they may or may not live later, and that's sometimes an aspect of mental health, like we struggle to close that end of the loop, but there was chaos, someone was stuck, they were bleeding out, they were dying, whatever, we came, we did the thing. You guys and girls get the mission brief. You go, you do the thing. You're successful on target. You're successful at the reconnaissance, whatever it might be. Close the loop. Here's the physical thing that we produced today, and I can golden thread it through in my head as to how that moves the needle as to what our thing is doing. But yeah, sitting in a glass box, I just think, like, it seems like a fucking weird game we've invented where I'm like, create the Word document. Well, it feels like school. And like, school was designed to get you ready for the corporate world. I've got 3 kids. The middle one's 18, eldest 23, youngest is 11. The middle one, 18, is like at the end of he's at that weird end of the conveyor belt. I had this conversation with my wife yesterday, right? Like, you move along the conveyor belt in school. Yeah. You get on, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You just keep moving. They chuck shit at you as you come, And then at the end, at 18 or 17, 16, you drop off the end. And then if you're not sure what you want to do, you can choose to get onto the university, which is another structured conveyor belt designed to get you toward a thing. But you've been conditioned to do the thing, move along the conveyor, do the thing, move along the conveyor. But then some people like you and me and people that join this type of work is you drop off the end of the conveyor and you fucking shoot left. Because you're like, I've been looking at that thing on the left for ages, it looks great. And I've been stuck in these little barriers down the conveyor belt. And then sometimes when we get into the thing and then we get put into an office job for some people, I think that's so difficult because you don't see the tangible reward of what you're doing anymore. Purpose. It's just like, oh, well, you created a report today. And it's like, so, and sometimes, I don't know, sometimes I admire people that can do that. Admiration's a weird word because, like, my mind, I just can't seem to convince. It's like,
I'd rather get shot at in Helmand than do a Microsoft spreadsheet. I do not do computers. I never have done. In school in Northern Ireland, we didn't really have loads of computers anyway. I don't want to sound like we were writing on chalkboards, but we just the internet was had barely been brought out whenever I was in school. So that whole internet thing wasn't really there. There was barely any computers, and so I'm not savvy with Microsoft shit and just computers because I then went, as you said, 19, off in a complete tangent world of the military where you didn't fucking do spreadsheets, you shot bullets, and you save, I can operate a 24.5-ton helicopter with millions of pounds, but I can barely change the battery in my car. I can change the battery in a Chinook, and it always makes me laugh. I know the hydraulics is throw a Chinook in and out, but I can't even fix the heating in my house because it's like, what you taught to know, isn't it? But you're right, I did a talk at my old school last year. It was one of the best, the biggest highlights of the year last year. I went back to my old, and I went to a grammar school, so it was absolutely, you're going to university, you're going to fill a UCAS form, you're going to university. I didn't and had the most amazing career. So going back last year when I was giving the talk on Prize Day, I basically said, there are 25 subjects you can study at the school. There are more than 25 jobs out there. Newsflash, you will very rarely find the job sat here in the classroom that you want to go and do. So get busy dreaming. Get busy looking out the window and daydreaming. Yes. And I went, I've got paid to look out the window my entire life and daydream. And you can see all the kids are going, yes! And all the staff are going,
I got paid to look out the window and dream. I love that. That's so true though. In other news, this episode is brought to you in partnership with MSA Safety. Today we have them to thank for the improved firefighter safety through connectivity in their brand new connected firefighter system. At the center of the connected firefighter platform is the MSA M1 SCBA with telemetry. You can view battery life, air pressure, and estimated time remaining either independently on the M1 itself or from the Lunar connected device screen. Also, still with the air status, alarm information, search status, and all of this provided to the incident command for confident decision making during the scene. That integrates straight in with the Lunar system, which is a wireless all-in-one device creating an independent search and rescue network, providing edge detection, enhanced personal thermal imaging, while simplifying post-scene reporting and data retention. One of the key parts of the Lunar is their FAST system, the Firefighting Assisting Search Technology. This combines directional and distance information with thermal imaging to help find separated teammates and decrease response time. It actually connects you to the other crews in the vicinity for a unified search during the time of mutual aid by instantly notifying the network of Lunar devices when there is a downed crew member, allowing for a prompt search and rescue. All of this then plugs into the FireGrid system for cloud-based connectivity, real-time information, and data-driven decisions for the incident commander. It enables you to see the exact location of your firefighters on the scene. And it doesn't require you to be sat on the station. The MSA hub then provides a wireless gateway straight to the cloud, enabling wireless on-scene data for local and remote incident command for additional eyes on the scene. MSA are truly taking massive strides in the future of improved firefighter safety through connectivity. MSA is dedicated to increasing safety in the fire service through technological advancements. Various feature enhancements, new products, partnerships, and integrations will provide additional capabilities readily accessible by products, software, and services in the brand new MSA Connected Firefighter platform. Now back to the show. Like our parents, because we're roughly the same age, they were like conditioned to 20 or 30 options for jobs. It was like accountant, join the factory, be a builder, be a banker, whatever. But I think that paralysis of choice is also a challenge in things for young kids. And I think that's part of the reason we see less coming into first responders, maybe less coming into the military. You would know far better than me. But like, if you and I sat down, if we were a couple and we sat down, we had like a wall full of DVDs. If we had 300 DVDs, it might take us a fucking hour to choose, at which point there's no point us watching a film anymore. But if we only had 4, then we'd like, oh yeah, let's definitely watch that tonight because that's the one we want to watch. So I feel like there's a weird paralysis of choice as well that kids have, where we say, look, you can be anything, but like that's like an empty box of freedom because you give them it and they're like, oh, great, I can be it, but I don't know what that is because I'm so conditioned to being in a structured thing. I mean, you went to Iraq when you were 21. I mean, just give us a little circle back tour for a second. What made you want to join and get into that? Because you were one of the youngest ever.
Yeah, so it was because my older brother, coming back to this, like things that we like, you know, just having that dream. My older brother was really into the army, and like whenever we were kids, we used to play army out in the fields at home. You know, that idyllic childhood where you go off with a backpack all day and like a wagon wheel in your rucksack. That was me and my brother.
Have a BB gun, accidentally set fire to the grass because you're trying to make a little thing. And as long as you came back at tea time, as long as you came back at tea time and you still had your arms and your legs attached, it was a success. And whenever he was 18, he went to join the army, and I went with him when he did his exam. And when he was in doing his exam, in a place called Palace Barracks in Northern Ireland, there was a magazine, and on the front of the magazine there was a guy hanging out the side of a helicopter, and I thought it was on a piece of rope initially, and I was like, oh, what's this job, the guy on the rope? And they said, well, it's not a rope, it's a wire, and the job's helicopter crewman. And I remember looking at it and just going, that's what I want to do. So that's kind of how I ended up getting into the RAF and did like exams, or did an interview and did like aptitude exams and stuff to get in. But I genuinely think that until really Iraq, I think maybe I didn't actually know what the job was. I was just doing it and loving it, but I didn't really know what like, I knew that the crewmen were the eyes and ears for the pilot and that kind of thing. But I think as my career went on, it's like a really evolving job as well. We're kind of described as jack of all trades, master of none. So it's like the pilots just go, you know, what, like they hand us the nav, sometimes we do the radio, obviously manning the weapons. But yeah, so Iraq was kind of the first time I thought, this is what a crewman is. This is what we do. Was the military in general not a petrifying thought? I mean, what did your parents think about you doing it? Because again, tell me geography or my memory history might be terrible, but like Northern Ireland has historically always been fairly active area for challenges, and we're not going to get into the politics of that. But like, what did your parents think? Because I live in the UK, I've seen weapons in the UK. Obviously, I've seen guns and stuff when I visit Birmingham, London, and stuff like that. But I've never seen a shootout in the street. I've never heard of a bomb going off close to me. I've never heard of this stuff. Is much more recent in memory for probably your parents and maybe your family, maybe even yourself. Was there not? I feel like you already had a greater understanding of what this might look like. And did your parents not discourage that, or did that Forced them to
I was
encourage
really
you, I
lucky.
don't know.
My parents were like, do you know what? I think they saw in me how lucky I was to know what I want to do. And coming back to that thing about kids earlier, there's so many kids there who are qualified up the yin
Yeah.
yang when they leave school or even university. They've got a degree in underwater basket weaving, but they don't know what to do with it. And they don't have that thing that they know they want to do. And I did. So my mum and dad really encouraged that.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
good,
my mum and
yeah.
dad. Well, we
What
always
was
used to
that?
go out a night out in the lash in the military, and the lads would wind up some women by saying they were underwater firefighters. I don't know if you lot do the same thing, but yeah. So they were really encouraging. They used to get me. They were like absolutely just wanted me to follow my dream. And at one point, my older brother. My older stepbrother as well, and I were all deployed at the same time. So myself and my first stepbrother were in Afghanistan, and my other older brother was in Iraq. And I remember my dad having a little bit of a meltdown back home. He basically wrote a letter to Tony Blair and said, "All of my children are deployed." And I was like, "Dad, we're all volunteers. If someone had said to me, you can't go on your deployment with your squadron and with all your mates because your brothers are both away and we can't have you all deployed at the same time, like Saving Private Ryan, I would have been distraught because I was like, no, I want to go when it's my
Yeah, yeah,
turn to
yeah.
go.
Why am I being disadvantaged just because my
Yeah,
siblings going?
exactly. So I was quite lucky that they knew they were the absolute opposite. They were really, really encouraging. And I think then bearing in mind though, I joined a week after 9/11, so I'd already been accepted into the RAF and all that kind of stuff was already, the wheels were in motion. I was already sprinting towards, the joining
Yeah.
up and putting the uniform on. And I don't think anyone really realised how much 9/11 was going to affect what we were going to do as a force, as a Chinook force specifically, never just mind the British forces. But I don't think my mum sat back in Newton Ards in Northern Ireland, realised that her daughter was more than likely going to be in a war zone and probably going to be at war most of her career after, from that moment. But that is exactly what happened. And I think later on, that's probably when mum, I would never say she regretted letting me join up, but there was certainly moments where she was quite, fraught with worry at home. Mind you, worrying is like an Irish sport. Honestly, my mum could worry for could win a championship in it. But I think, me being away so much on the Chinook fleet, and it didn't help that the BBC News were reporting every single day that Chinooks were getting shot up and
Yeah.
bringing in the casualties. And I think it's fair to say all of the British public at one point were just seeing bodies coming back in coffins weeks on end. So yeah, it certainly wasn't an easy thing for my parents to watch from the sideline at one point.
That aspect of finding passion that you speak about there, and we'll close the loop on this and move on. But you're right. You just want your friends, your family, your kids, your colleagues to find a passion in anything. Do you know what I mean? That's the thing that I think with hemorrhaged and the things I worry most about. But also the pivotal aspect you spoke about there about 9/11. Things like that really calcify a nation. It's like forges it and brings it together and gives it a common purpose and a common goal for people to push towards. But the downside of that, I don't know, is it's all well and good me, I'm a firefighter, shouting, oh yeah, I really support actually. I'm not the one fucking doing it. Do you know what I mean? And war is, to my extraordinarily limited understanding, it's kind of lose-lose. All that, even to win, you lose. And I hear that when there's always a cost. I always say there's no solutions, only trade-offs. Do you know what I mean? Someone is always paying a cost of some form. And you're so right. We did see so much footage of you guys and girls lumbering, and I say that with respect, around the skies, because it just felt like sometimes it just didn't make sense. I appreciate the efficiency, and maybe you can take us into some of the tactical advantages that it gave you. But it just felt like, Jesus Christ.
But we are very much similar mindset.
It's a bit like running across an open field
I do
every
think
day.
though there's a similar mindset in terms of how guys and girls think about stuff and how very much soldiers think about stuff and people in the forces, because and that's not the same for all of the forces, by the way. There are plenty of people in the forces who join up and probably never leave their home station here in the UK or go to war.
That's a really, really great point. I think it's something, I read it recently, like less than 20% ever actually deploy to a war zone. I'm not saying that they don't do a great job, but even of the 20% that deploy, a lot of that is admin, logistics,
again, my
support,
brother was in
blah,
there
blah, blah.
really.
People like you guys and girls at the tip of the sword is a very small percentage.
But equally, I get asked all the time if I was ever scared going into like a firefight to go and rescue casualties. And very often, like the heyday of Herrick, when it was most kinetic, every time we were going in to get casualties, the casualty had resulted from an IED strike or troops in contact, so a gunfight. So that was generally still happening when we were getting there to get the casualties. And people would always used to ask me, were you not scared? And I was like, well, no, we had a job to do. And it's exactly the same as you guys. You don't stand at a burning building, which is probably the scariest concept to anybody else in the British public, is to stand and look at a terrifying building on fire where they're going to run away. And you're running in, yeah. And it's a very similar mindset, I think, how you guys work mentally, and the same with us, because it's your job and it's what you train to do, really.
And like you say, if you have an absence of purpose, that's where fear and anxiety and overwhelm can exist. Like if I was in your shoes, I would feel that fear and overwhelm because I don't understand my purpose in it. I don't understand how I could add value. Yes, as an egotistical 18 stone 6'5" male, I'd probably have a little bit of ego that says, I'm sure I could be useful in some capacity. But I would immediately be hit with a series of scenarios where I've not been trained for this. I don't know how to deal with it. But a big part of our conversation, I suppose, that we're going to be talking about today is we focus so much on training people physically, tactically, in a command structure, the logistics. What sort of went into the result? Because we do all of that training because we're aware of the physical ramifications. You were going in recovering soldiers who were injured physically. So we've trained a lot for that and we've got good at doing it. What preparation did you have for all of this mentally? Was there anything given to that? Was there any kind of training, conditioning, things you were encouraged to prepare yourself
So that's a really good question. And the answer is no. We joined as aircrew to operate a helicopter, and we held a thing called IRT in Iraq, and that was where we were essentially the flying ambulance, because as soon as you got British boots on the ground, you've got to have the flying ambulance to go and get them. And it was really small. It had a couple of medics on board, a bit of med kit, nothing massive. And in the early days in Herrick, it was the same. But, our main bread and butter was to operate that aircraft, to operate the guns, to do the navigation, do all that stuff. And it was like almost like a side task of like picking up these casualties. And they weren't that, in the early days, some of the casualties were not that bad. It was vehicle incidents, it was guys falling off the Hesco Bastion or roofs and things like that. But then from about 08, 09, it got really tasty very, very quickly in Helmand, because we put more and more troops on the ground. And it stands to reason, the more troops you've got on the ground, the more bullets are going to fly, the more IEDs are going to get stood on. And that's when kind of the mission very much shifted to just rescuing lives at one point. And the stuff we were seeing down the back of the aircraft was, torsos, people with legs missing, people with literally gunshot wounds to the head that were dying at our feet. But we were still aircrew first and foremost. We were not the medics who were in there saving lives. And I think I always talk about this, how I normalized it, over the years. I went from saying someone with a broken leg or whatever, or appendicitis on a stretcher, to seeing someone with literally a torso on a stretcher and then people dying. But I saw it kind of grew really, really slowly over the years. Whereas we had aircrew that came behind me, some of the young guys had literally joined up, they'd spun through their training really quickly. In a year out of either university or high school, these guys are on the front line in Afghanistan with me, day one in Herrick, picking up bits of bodies. And they're the guys that suffered more, I think, because they were straight in at the deep end without that chance to normalise what they were saying. Whereas we did, what my generation did, but it also has a double-edged sword. And you guys are totally guilty of this as well, I think, is that we as a fleet started to normalise trauma and danger. And I knew I had done that massively. Like when my last merch out in Herrick, which was like 2014 or something, we picked up an American who'd been killed, and I was handed his foot in a clear plastic bag. And I was just like, just put it on my feet. And I was so completely immune to that.
It just becomes cargo. Yeah. Because if we were to simplify it for people in the UK, like if someone said, Pete, you're just an Uber driver, just pick the thing up and then go and drop it off. And I go to pick it up and it's 20 bags of cocaine, or it's a human head, or it's like, and I'm like, oh shit, I wasn't prepared for that. And I've seen the aircrafts and stuff that you work in. This stuff's just next to you. It's like, so you drop in, you give in Spressfire or whatever, and then you touch down and someone just loads it in next to you, and you're like, oh yeah, I'll grab that bit for you trying to be helpful. And it's someone's leg or hanging off part of that, and it's happening right next to you. And it's not your task, but it's right here. And you've got to focus on the thing that you're doing. And like you say, it just encourages you to say, look, Liz, I haven't got the cognitive capacity to be worrying about this thing as well, because my job is this.
We used to get junior crewmen, and on there, because I became an instructor, so over the years I'd fly with all the junior guys, and they would just watch it on. We'd pick up casualties, and I'd be at the front of the aircraft at the back, and they would just stare at the floor as what was happening, and I'd be like, Ben, look out the window, Ben, man the gun, Ben, and you'd have to prompt them to pull them out of that because they just got sucked in, and it was like watching death TV, but they were just so drawn into what was happening on the floor while the medics were working on the casualties that they've completely forgotten what their primary role was, which was to look out the window. But I certainly think that the things that hit me the most, really, I mean, we obviously saw the collective loss in Herrick, all those coffins that you guys saw coming back here in the UK. We picked up the majority of them, it's fair to say, out in Herrick, and not just the ones that came back in the coffins, but all the guys that came back with limbs missing and life-changing injuries. We saw the collective damage and loss that campaign brought. But the hardest thing I ever had to process was watching, whenever we used to have a mix of like walking wounded and guys on stretchers, was watching, if one of the casualties didn't survive and passed away in the back of the aircraft, if we had their mates on board, they would be watching that as well. And obviously they're much more emotionally connected to the person that's just died on the floor than I am. But watching their emotions unfold was always really hard, because soldiers are very good at just blocking that out. You'd see their eyes glaze over potentially, but they were very, very strong still. And you just thought, are they as immune to it as we are now? Or they just...
Yeah. And also, because you've still got a job to do after that. So like, they pass away on the way back, and then you get back and you're like, you need to get off now, because
we're going to go again. And sometimes
else.
In Herrick, you've done loads.
I heard a terrible but hilarious but equally horrific. Do you know Ian Dilksey? He was retired SAS. He actually does the SAS Who Dares Win show. He's the big bold interrogator in it. He's a firefighter now.
Oh, is he?
Great guy. And he was talking to me. We had him on the podcast, and he was saying when he was talking to one of the members of his crew that he works with now, and there was an old station officer talking about trauma and mental health, and like I can see someone giving you this talk on the back of there. Like he gave the example of a rabbit. He said, imagine if you saw a dead rabbit on the road. He said, now it's not your rabbit. If it was your rabbit, I'd expect you to get really upset, and that would be understandable. But it's not your rabbit, is it? It's that little girl's rabbit. So just imagine it as someone else's rabbit. And I was like, what the fuck? And like, it's like someone saying to you, Liz, they're not on your team though, are they, Liz? Now, if it was your teammate, I'd expect you to get upset. But they're not your teammate. So just think of it as someone you don't know. And I thought, that's fucking ridiculous and terrible and horrible. And but there is a genuine thing, and paramedics have this quite a lot, and I know a lot of other first responders, and I imagine you guys and girls do as well, this empathy exhaustion, where in order to survive, you need to put a bit of a cap on A, your adrenaline, B, your empathy, because otherwise it's too much of a mental roller coaster. But certainly for us, and I don't know what it was like for you when you came back, I'd be interested to hear that when a friend or a partner or something like that injures themselves, it looks like you don't care. Like, I remember one of my dogs jumping up to my wife. She was bending down to put the lead on him, jumped up, smashed her in the nose with his head by accident, and she's streaming from her nose. And she's,
You didn't laugh. Tell me you didn't laugh.
I fucking laughed. And I was like, fucking, he got you. Because he's a tiny little puppy, a little Springer Spaniel, but his head like a
mallet,
till. Yeah. And he's smashed her in the nose. And I'm like, I grabbed him and I'm smirking and laughing. And she's like, afterwards, she's like, you just fucking stood there and looked at me. I was like, it's just a bleeding nose. You were fine.
Yeah.
You weren't. But I love her very much, and she hurt herself, and that was perhaps not the right way to deal with it. But it's really weird to insert yourself back into normal life in so many things, and especially like we're talking about office work. Yeah, because someone says, "Oh, Liz, someone's eating my fucking sandwich today. It's the worst day of my life. So and so sat in my seat," and you're like, "Right, my mental spectrum is so different to yours. I can't seem to connect with you on this." Ever heard the quote that true leaders are readers? Well, we believe this is true. Listeners often ask where we go to keep our finger on the pulse of what's happening in the sector globally. So there are a few key publications which I encourage you to go check out. Now, if you're looking for insights on disaster management, fire protection and firefighting, for us, we go to Asia Pacific Fire Magazine. And when you're looking for the latest on the Middle East fire protection industry and fire services, it's Gulf Fire Magazine. And our quarterly check-in is with International Firefighter Magazine, reporting to municipal, industrial and fire training professionals. Now, next up, and widely accepted to be the global voice for passive and active fire protection, this is a good one. It's International Fire Protection Magazine. And finally, and perhaps the most relevant to our predominantly UK audience, I'd strongly suggest subscribing to UK Fire Magazine, reporting to the United Kingdom fire protection industry and fire services. We're really excited to announce that after a long-standing relationship and mutual respect, we've now partnered with MDM Publishing, who bring you all of these essential publications. Because in a world of change, the learners shall inherit the earth, while the learned shall find themselves perfectly suited for a world that no longer exists. Eric Hoffer said that, and I believe he was right. So keep growing, keep learning, and keep yourself in the know and at the cutting edge of what's happening globally by dropping into the notes. And as a gift from the podcast, you can actually subscribe to any of these publications for free using the link in our notes. Now back to the show.
I went in a hen do. I came back from one of my Herricks. It was right in the middle, really. And I came back from one of them and it was straight on to leave and was at a friend's hen do up in Liverpool. Some of my mates from Northern Ireland had come over, my girly friends. And I arrived and the first morning, we were staying like an apartment. The first morning came down the stairs and I could hear one of the girls in floods of tears downstairs. And I thought something catastrophic's happened here. I said to Laura, who my mate...
Her husband's dead.
Yeah, exactly. And I said to my mate Laura, who's a copper, I said, what's happened? And she said, well, she goes, just don't ask. And I went, no, like, can I help? What's happened? She went, honestly, don't ask. I started to smirk. And I was like, what? Like, Laura, just tell me. She went, Tony's forgotten her straighteners. And I went, like, because I'd literally been picking up dead bodies 3 days later, or 3 days earlier. And as Laura said, look, in your world, this is not big. In her world, it's huge. And, and again, that kind of gave me the perspective of going, Liz, Tony hasn't been picking up dead bodies in Afghanistan, so just let her have her moment. But coming back to that desensitizing thing, we absolutely never thought about who was in the body bag. For us, it was a very precious piece of freight we had to get back to Camp Bastion. And we never really thought about who was inside. And that was a coping mechanism. I think it's fair to say most of us were the same. Now, sometimes you couldn't avoid it because if they subsequently died, it was obviously all on Sky News and you'd see the repatriation on Sky News or BBC or whatever. And we would just sit in the tent most of the time on deck. Being at war is 99% nothing and 1% complete chaos. So 99% of the time you're just sat watching box sets and TV and stuff. But you would see that, you'd see the news, you would see the picture of the guy or the girl and you'd hear the backstory. But in the main, we didn't really follow that up. And it was only then many, many years later when I started to unravel with my PTSD, I started looking them all up in the middle of the night. And that's when I really started to fall off the cliff in terms of PTSD, because suddenly all these people weren't just bodies anymore, they were actual people with backstories and things like that. And I think that's where the best coping mechanism, the police do the same, that dark humour, it does get us through, I think. But what happens when the humour dries up and the music stops? And I think that's what I think you guys, me, same for NHS, really. We are great at coping with it when it's still really loud music distracting you and the job to do. But it's actually when someone turns that all off that things start to catch up with you a little bit. And I think that's certainly what happened to me.
I absolutely agree with you in so many things. There's so many things racing through my head as I'm listening to you there, because you did a lot. Let's talk about as that realization started to present itself to you. So just to recap for people, you did 2 deployments to Iraq, you did 10 deployments to Afghan, to Helmand there. How far through this how soon did it become normal and how soon did it start to feel different? How aware did you become of the cognitive baggage you were unloading and being not able to process? How was the mind space clogging up? Because things eventually came to a head in 2019 for you, I think it was.
Well, weirdly, so I didn't think I had any issues. I was like just, at the top of my career. I was doing really well. Came out of Afghan and, it was just, never thought I had any issues. And I'd seen so many colleagues fall along the way. Again, those people who had kind of been parachuted in straight from basic training, crumbled, people that I used to always say to people, don't overthink it, because if you overthink it, you'll come unstuck. And I was like, just don't think it, and you could tell the people that were already starting to think about it, and they were the people that got PTSD. And then I end up not basically leaving the Air Force because I damaged my neck. You know, the Chinook is not a kind aircraft to the body. I've basically been wearing helmet, NVGs, which is night vision goggles, body armour, hanging out under a helicopter for 3,000 flying hours in 17 years, and it took its toll. So I left in 2019. And
I bet they're not ergonomically designed for comfort.
No, we don't even have a seat down the back. You know, it's just not designed to kind of preserve the body.
Oh, no.
But my ex-husband, well, my husband at the time, was in the SAS, and he left the same time as me. And I remember the day we both left, and we literally cracked a bottle of champagne, toasted ourselves in the kitchen, and went like, how did we get out alive? You know, we've both got all of our body intact, and our brains are fine, and we honestly couldn't believe it. And I genuinely thought I'd done
how old would you have been then?
I was 37 when I came out, yeah.
Why did you decide to leave? Because that's still very, very young in the grand
Oh,
scheme
I didn't
of
want to
things.
leave. I was medically discharged because of this neck injury. They offered me a desk job, but I joined to fly Chinook Helicopters, and I did the desk job for about 3 weeks, and I just sat there looking out the window and going, this is not what I joined to do.
Was that not petrifying in itself, though? Because like this is something we talk about regularly, like the aspect of retirement, and especially a job that you did. And I almost think it's worse, or I mean harder in the military or in the RAF, because it's so immersive. You live it.
Yeah.
You're on base. You're on training. You're on deployment. You don't go home every day in the same respect. It's a fully immersive experience. You're conditioned. You're sort of in that system.
Yeah.
And it's so much of your identity as well. There's almost a death of identity.
Oh, absolutely.
Because this is 90% of who I am.
I was institutionalized. I mean, I joined on my 19th birthday. It was all I'd ever known in my adult working life. And, you know, every day I wear my flying suit, like a Batwoman costume or a bat costume. It was just like, and I had my brevet on my chest, and it said Liz McConaghy, Chinook crewman, and all aircrew have that brevet. You know, pilots have theirs and whatever. And I look back now and think, is that so other people could see who I was, or so I could look at it every day and go, this is who you are, and then it's just off. Literally overnight. And you know, it was a very hard stop at the end of the forces. It's again, I do a lot of stuff now with the police, and I don't know what it's like in the fire service, but in the forces when you leave, even if you get medically discharged,
it's terrible in the fire service. Like there's a running joke. How do you know if you're around a firefighter? Trust me, they'll tell you.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So firefighters it's so much of their identity. Accountants, you don't know if somebody's. They don't walk around telling you they're an accountant. Firefighters, for better or worse, for many reasons, I'm sure, it's such a big part of their identity.
Yeah, and it's such a hard stop at the end. I mean, we get a little tiny bit of resettlement of like how to write a CV for Civvy Street, but ultimately you're in the club on the Friday, and then you hand in your uniform, they cut your ID up in front of you, and the corner's off, so you can't get back on camp. And then on the Monday, even if you want to go and see your best mates that you've worked with for your whole life, you know, I had 17 years worth of mates all in Odium behind the wire, because I'd been stationed there my whole career. So all of my best mates were there. You know, I'd moved from Northern Ireland. I didn't have any mates and family around here. I didn't have any civvy friends. So all of my best mates were still behind the wire. Yet now I had to pull in, get a car pass, get escorted onto camp to go and see any of them. And it's a really hard stop at the end of the force's life. And I think coming back to that identity thing, I genuinely felt invisible for a long time after I left. I just felt like I'm just Liz from Basingstoke. Like, I'm nothing special. And as you said about the firefighter thing, you almost do introduce yourself. You know, I used to be, I'm Liz, I'm in the Air Force, I'm a Chinook crewman. It was like a line that always just went together. And the same, you know, you introduce yourself, I'm a firefighter. It's how the line of introduction goes. And suddenly it was just like, I'm just Liz. And I don't care what anyone says about, you know, people say, oh, it's not good to label people and no one likes labels. We do. We all need one.
We always label. It's a natural
We need
thing.
a label.
You know, we label people. We judge a book by its cover, because these are things that are in your DNA.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? You're designed. Is this thing a threat to me? What does it stand for? Yeah. That's part of your DNA. When you're an animal, when you're an ape, you judge a book by its cover. Is it an immediate threat? Is it safe? Is it not? What's it called? It has an identity.
Yeah.
So, but you were, like I say, you were so young. Like, average woman, I think, dies at early 80s, something like that. So
that's why I left.
Not even thinking about death, but
there was
like,
two reasons why.
You're gonna be around for another 50 years. You're not even halfway through the game.
That was kind of part of the thought process, because I'd obviously been offered this desk job, which I really didn't want to do, and I didn't want to look out the window and, you know, just see Chinooks taking off. I think if I'd been offered that maybe 10 years later, I may have stayed in and done it and just sucked it up. But I thought, I'm 37. I've got the whole chance of a second career here doing something. I don't know what, but I'll figure it out, because, you know, I even look back to whenever I joined up, and I think, you know, if I'd have looked at that magazine and thought, well, I'm not an air cadet, so I can't join the Air Force, or I'm not a man, so I can't do the job of crewman. I don't even live in England, so how can I be this job? But I didn't. I had this kind of feeling of, well, just give it a go. What's the worst can happen? So I think at 37, I
I
thought,
always say shy kids don't get sweets.
Yeah.
You know, if you just, what's the worst thing they'll say? No. Okay, nobody died.
yeah,
You know.
yeah. But weirdly, I suffer imposter syndrome really badly now. And it's like,
No
I'm an
way.
author now and I do motivational speaking. And I sometimes sit at the side of a room, waiting to go on stage. And there's like, 800 people in the room or something. And I really struggle. I sit there and it's not nerves. I don't really suffer from nerves, but I suffer from this like, why do they even want to hear what I've got to say? And then I nearly every time get a standing ovation and people coming up at the end, and it's incredible, but I still suffer from this really bad. And I think as you get older, it's like as you get older, you become more aware of your own immortality, don't you? It's like there's more to lose, so you're way more aware of your own immortality. It's like you watch kids go down a ski slope and they just don't give a shit, and young people on motorbikes, kids on motorbikes again, they don't know what there is to lose. And I think as you get older, you're aware of your immortality, but you're also aware of what other people's opinions are so much more as you get older. And that's where that imposter syndrome really kicks in for me. I'm just constantly worried what people will think.
I think it's the level of vulnerability you put yourself into, because I always say your superpowers sit directly next to your scars usually, and you've taken something that was a mental scar, that was a very difficult period of your life to get through. You've had to come through the valley, and you've collected a few golden nuggets in the bottom of the valley, and you've dragged them back up into reality. And now it's a superpower. Now it's something people can see and hear from. And again, you'll be the best one to tell us through how you got through that. But sort of through blind luck, you made it through the narrow gap of trauma. And that is one of those, I feel like we're all speeding towards a wall in first responders and in the military if they've been through traumatic instances. There's a few gaps that if you're lucky enough and you're in the right place and you've got the right people around you and the right solutions, you might make it through. But so many people hit the proverbial wall that often manifests itself in self-harm or suicide, and they didn't make it through.
Yeah.
And you're not sure why, and you wished they'd have spoken or reached out to you. Like, talk us through how you made it through the narrow gap. If you're a regular listener to the podcast, then chances are you are big into your own personal development and the development of firefighters around you. So I wanted to remind you of our mobile app Drill Book. This is a free training and development resources made by firefighters for firefighters. Heading on to Drillbook, you will find incident debriefs, radio messages, knots and lines, quick reference guides, quizzes every single day. We've got useful links to the ERG, to Web Rescue, to Jessup, Euro Rescue, 10-second triage, National Operational Guidance. You've got trauma skills sessions and questions in there with 10-second surveys, patient handovers, questioning, bleed controls, vitals, major incidents, and not to mention our daily quizzes where you will find questions on extrication, casualty handling, breathing apparatus, fire development, water rescue, rope rescue, you name it. It is the go-to resource if you've got a spare 5 minutes on the firehouse to develop yourself and those around you. Not only that, if you're looking to get into the fire service, we've got advice on there on interview questions, interview answers. You can build your own questioning in there. We've got radio messages apps where you can develop and put together your own methane IFCO, and a whole area dedicated to knots and lines and incident debriefs as well. All of the incident debriefs that we have gone through on the podcast, you'll find them there. And again, remember, this is built by firefighters for firefighters, so you can add your own drills in there. You can pick the drills that you find the most favorite. When you go to search for different drills in there, you can find breathing apparatus, hazmat, incident command, ladder drills, pumping, RTC, trauma skills, winching and recovery, urban search and rescue, height rescue, water rescue. There is literally hundreds of training ideas, hundreds of drills in there. And you can continue to build this library of resource for yourself and for firefighters all around the world. Remember, this app is absolutely free and it grows every single day down to the contributions of our thousands and thousands of users. So if you've got that favorite training drill and you want to share it with somebody else, get in there. If you're looking for ideas for training yourself and your crews, get in there. It's freely available on Android, Apple, and you will find it in the links for this podcast. Remember, it's called personal development. The clue's in the name. You've got to work twice as hard on yourself as you do on the job. So always be growing, always be developing. Now let's get back to the show.
So, like I said earlier about that, unraveling, and when I started to look up the guys that we picked up on MERT, that was it. Basically, lockdown hit in 2020. I was now obviously a civvy, come out of the Air Force a year beforehand. And I developed insomnia really badly during lockdown because I had no routine. We had absolutely no routine. That's something like loads of forces people thrive on. You know, every morning I get up, there's always a gym visit at some point in your day to keep us on the... And running had been my coping mechanism throughout my entire forces career. You know, I was like Forrest Gump at one point. I would just... And it's like going to the gym, you know, if you have something in your day that's traumatic, the easiest way to empty the bucket, I think, for loads and loads of people is physical exercise. It seems to, you know, there's documented evidence.
Do you know why that is? And this hit me the other day, and I actually heard it on another podcast, so I'm not going to take credit for it. We all think we're looking for peace of mind. We're not. We're looking for peace from mind.
Oh, yeah.
So whenever you're doing an ice bath or a sauna for ages or a really hard workout, and this is like before we came on talking today, I was talking about CrossFit. One of the reasons I enjoy a CrossFit workout, and lots of other sports are the same, it's so fucking hard. I can't think about anything else. When I lift weights, there's still something going on in my head and it can itch at me, and like my ADHD is just annoying me. But if I'm doing something really hard, you know, I'm doing sprints, I'm doing a really hard row, I'm doing whatever, I can't think about anything else, and I have peace from mind. This all-consuming activity has shut off my ridiculous attention deficit mind that's thinking about everything else and thinking about social structure and finance and my job and my kids and my relationships and what's everyone thinking. Shut the fuck up.
I love that though. I've never heard that term, but it's so true. And so I used to run. I mean, I was doing Ironman triathlons and running like 60, 70 miles a week at one point. I was just like Forrest Gump, because the more I saw trauma-wise, I would just run and run and run. I was quite well known for it. You know, people were like, "Where's Liz?" Well, where do you think she is? She's gone for a run. And that all stopped in lockdown because you were like 10 minutes exercise. And for someone who used to run marathons, I was like, I'm not even putting my shoes on for that. So that's what started to unravel.
So you had like a double drop. So you've been dropped out of the culture of this thing, landed on the ground, and then the ground's immediately given way as well because society shut down, no social structure,
and like I said, when the music stops
reintegration.
And all of the music, like the music just didn't stop a little bit for lockdown, it stopped for everyone. And I was sat on my own. I'd gone through a messy divorce from my ex, who was special forces, and he and I started to have a really messy divorce. And so I found myself on my own in my little apartment on my own. And, you know, from a career that is very gregarious, there's no two ways about it. Same with you guys, you know, it's really gregarious, a career in the forces or the blue light services, because you're in the crew room together, there's the banter, you live and breathe it. So I was on my own with my own thoughts, and then I started to look up a lot. One night when I couldn't sleep, I started to look up the back catalogue of these soldiers that had died in the back of the aircraft, and all the red flags were going, but I never reached out to anybody for any help. And I think that's because and this is very much an internal pressure that I put on myself. I never wanted to be a burden. And, you know, I never wanted to be the girl crying around the back of the tent, even though that would have been absolutely fine. None of the lads would have ever judged me, and I was always just considered to be one of the team. And I think the fire service seems to be really good for that as well. You know, you just one team and you all succeed or fail together, and the forces is really like that. So I was never ever made to feel like the weaker sex. But I put that pressure on me. So I didn't want to phone anyone, didn't want to be the burden. Everyone else was going through something in lockdown. So I kind of kept suffering on my own. And then in August, took a huge overdose of 95 amitriptyline, which is, I mean, massive, really. I shouldn't genuinely probably be alive. And I often wonder, you're saying about that, you know, when you sneaked through a crack. I don't know how I survived. I think basically took the overdose, don't recall anything afterwards, and then woke up in high dependency unit in Basingstoke, intubated two days later.
How did you see that as a permanent solution to what was realistically a temporary problem?
So I'd never been affected by anyone with suicide before, but I genuinely think beforehand, I used to think of suicide as a really coward's way out. I was like, it's the easy option, you leave loads of like broken people behind, all these questions. And I remember genuinely thinking that suicide was a coward's way to do something. And then here I was on that day, completely, I guess, it felt like I'd been body snatched by the Grim Reaper. I wasn't of sound mind. I was in the departure lounge 100% of life. And I woke up that morning and felt, like I picked up my donut at a water slide, and I was only going one way that day. And I spent the whole day planning it meticulously. I wrote a suicide note to my parents, but I had absolutely no emotion at this point. And I, cleaned my apartment, had a shower, did my hair and makeup and everything, and not once cried. And weirdly, and the scary thing is, there's suicide websites out there where you can go on a website and you can figure out how many drugs you need to kill yourself from people who have survived and said, I'm going to take more next time. And it's really scary that they exist, and they absolutely need shut down. And I found myself on these websites, like, and I look back now and think, like, from the person you're chatting today, it was not me. It was like I'd been body snatched, and planned it with meticulous detail.
This is the fucking dark humor coming out of me, but like, who keeps those websites up to date?
I know.
Because surely the people that start them
It's like an
are
open
trying
forum
to commit suicide. So who the fuck is keeping this going? Because surely if you're any good at
You
it,
shouldn't go there.
you killed yourself.
know?
And I'm sorry, people.
It's like
I'm
Kamikaze
sure
pilot,
people will
isn't it?
appreciate just the dark. I'm like, who the fuck's keeping this going? Like, if I had a great, like, if I died tomorrow, the podcast wouldn't keep
Yeah.
going.
It's mainly survivors. It's people who have attempted and then failed and then said, I'm going to take this amount next time, and like, honest, it's things like, this is what I weigh, this is what I'd eaten, this is what I took. Next time I'm going to take more of this. And it's really scary that those are out there. But the whole day was a really odd day because I woke up that morning, already felt suicidal and was really scared. So I actually I emailed my GP for help because it's so much harder to pick up a phone and go, I'm struggling when you're feeling like, when you're having emotions like that. So I emailed the GP and got an email instantly back from the pharmacy, which was next door to the GP. And they said, and the email said, this is me, I woke up this morning, I'm having suicidal thoughts and I think I need to speak to someone. And the GP or the pharmacy emailed me back and said, this is the pharmacy, you've emailed the wrong person, you need to call your GP. So I then called the GP at like 10 a.m, got a lovely lady on the phone, explained again, this is me, I woke up feeling suicidal, I'm very scared. She said, can you call back tomorrow? Which was laughable. And then at that point I broke down in tears, and I think she realised the gravity of the scenario. So she then got the GP to call me that afternoon. He called me at 2 o'clock. He prescribed me some antidepressants and said they'll be ready at 4 o'clock. But I had been taking in the background a drug called amitriptyline, which was for my neck injury from when I left the forces. And it's a really good sleeping tablet. It's a really good nerve blocker. So loads of people with injuries are on it.
I had it when I had a prolapse disc. It made me feel really dull.
Amitriptyline?
I felt it like it had like a compound effect.
A numbing effect.
It wouldn't just wear off. Yeah, like each day it felt like it got heavier.
It's a horrible
when
drug.
I was taking
it's
it.
attributable to 60% of suicides in the US. And I'd been given it for my neck pain, but it's a really good sleeping tablet because it knocks you out. So I'd actually taken it on the Sunday night, and essentially throughout that week until the Wednesday, it had been hijacking my mood slowly. And like you said, it makes you feel like a zombie. That's how antidepressants work.
I switched over to diazepam eventually because it had less of a psychological effect to it, I think. It's interesting you said, just for background, because I reminded myself then, and I just wanted to check on it, because they always used to say committed suicide. Suicide used to be a crime, didn't it? And I didn't realise it was as early as this, because I thought it was quite recently that it had changed. But it was the Suicide Act 1961. Before that, it was a crime to commit suicide, and if you attempted it and survived, you get prosecuted and imprisoned. And so would your family if you. No, they said if you successfully died, you could potentially prosecute the family because they were knowledgeable. But that was 1961. Now, and we still say committed suicide. Now we need to get it right, because we often are told that they've successfully carried out the act of suicide. But it is such a incredibly prolific thing now, and I do think it got compounded over the period of lockdown, because we've never been as connected as we are now. You and I are having this conversation virtually, but we've also never felt so alone. There's something about, and again, it speaks about the distancing and change in community that you had from your career into doing what you do now and being removed from it. We've never been as connected as we are now, but that social interconnectivity, not that that's a solution to everything, but that is something I think that really compounded it. We saw so many more suicides during COVID.
I think never underestimate the power of people. I think isolation is what will kill you. I genuinely believe that. I think if I hadn't hit lockdown,
we're social animals.
I still probably would be a ticking time bomb now with all that stuff going on inside. But I had some really great coping mechanisms to deal with that, which was the running, the keeping busy, the chatting to friends who had similar experiences. All those people from the Air Force, the people I'd served with in Afghan, so they all got it. Whereas all of that stopped. And I think, for anyone, it's isolation that will kill you, and being on your own and not having people around you. And I've got a dog now, and it sounds really silly, but having a dog and getting dragged out of the house every day.
100%.
I just, even if you talk to a random stranger on the street, you'll have an interaction with a human. You'll see sky. You potentially might get some vitamin D if you're lucky in the UK, but you just get dragged out. And I think, it'd be so easy to look out the window and go, oh, it's too wet out there today, or it's too cold out there. But actually, when you get dragged out of the house by your dog, you go, oh, it's not so cold, or it's not so wet.
We'll always do more for someone else than we'll do for
Yeah.
ourselves. So getting a dog is such a key for it. But you made an important point there, and I just want to challenge you on it. You said like I could still be vulnerable if I didn't have X, Y, Z, if I didn't do A, B, C, I could still be vulnerable now. And I feel like we're all eternally vulnerable. Like you're never not vulnerable from this. Like you never fully. So I'm a recovered addict, and I'm a recovering addict, because I always say to people, you never really stop being an addict. You just cross addict to something else.
Yes.
You know, we all have a susceptibility to become an addict. We all have a susceptibility to carry out the act of suicide. You know, we can all, I think you're only ever 2 or 3 bad situations away from hitting the fuck it button. Do you know what I mean? Things could go, if my wife left me and I lost my job, and like last year, I snapped my patella tendon, and I was in a wheelchair for a little bit and learning to walk for a couple of months. Like if I lost my job and my wife left me and I did that, bloody hell, I'd be close to the fuck it button.
Yeah, and the thing is, these kind of events all seem to kind of, one fuels the next, which fuels the next. And there's a chapter in the book I call it the domino effect, and that's essentially what happened in life.
Yes.
You know, I came out of the military, ended a career that I absolutely loved way ahead of time, found myself kind of floundering in Civvy Street, not really finding the same purpose and passion and identity again in any of the jobs I did. And then went through the divorce. I'd also lost a really good friend to cancer, who was another female crewman. And there was only ever 6 of us in the heyday. Like, we were thick as thieves because there were so few of us. And she died with cancer. And, you know, me and her dodged bullets in Helmand together. And then cancer took her. And it's a horrible, horrible disease. I mean, I don't need to tell anyone listening to that how bad cancer is. But watching your friend, who's a, you know, Ironman triathlon with me, you know, a war-fighting hero, crumbling away and getting eaten by cancer was horrendous. But these big dominoes were just tumbling, and I thought I was dealing with each one at a time, but the truth is they were just getting bigger and heavier, and it got to the point where I couldn't hold them up anymore. And I do a lot of corporate gigs now, you know, and I always say to people in the audience, you know, you don't have to be someone who's been to war to have these dominoes falling over in your life. It can be anything. It can be losing your job, then having to move house because you've lost your job, so you're now moving house. That might lead to a divorce, and all those things, that's what starts to, all the tectonic plates that you're used to standing on are now moving at the same time. And I think we as humans need something solid to hold on to, like a totem pole in a storm. And it's when all of the stuff starts to move at the same time, that's what really unhinges people. And you're right, they all seem to fuel one another.
How did you stop the slide? So I had something going on last year, which I really struggled with. And someone said to me one day, they were like, "Oh, how you doing, Pete?" And I said it by accident, but I held on to it afterwards because I think it was really good. I said, "I think I've stopped getting worse." And what I mean by that is, how did you stop the slide? So like you're talking about the domino effect there. It's a bit like you're sliding down an embankment towards a river. And you're grasping at things, and you kind of need to dig both your heels in at the same time to stop sliding. And then you can look at, how do I get back up this embankment and back onto some steady ground? But how did you, not just how did you get better, because again, that's an eternal thing. I always say to people, oh, you're looking for happiness. Happiness is fleeting. Happiness is like the fucking weather. You know, it's kind of here today, gone tomorrow. It's a I always say it's like an adjective. It's a doing thing. Yeah. It's not like, oh, I am happy today. Well, yeah, I'm happy right this very second.
The Irish have a saying.
In 10 minutes time.
Irish have this really good saying where they say sadness is upon me or happiness is upon me. And I think that's really, I love that. I think it's really good because it's not like I am sad. It's that it's here and it's sitting with me, but it'll be gone at some point.
There's a great, there's a mindfulness app. I forget what it's called now. It's really good. It's got some really good people that speak on it. But anyway, they give an example of your moods, your happiness and your sadness. Like you're sat on the side of a road and it's just like traffic. Yeah. So you can see sadness in the distance, or you can see anger's a good one. Like, oh, Liz just did this thing. Oh, that's triggering me a little bit. It's pissing me off a little bit. And then you feel that growing, or you feel the sadness growing. You feel the sad. And then, like you just said there, that's why it reminded me. Then all of a sudden it's upon you. Yeah. Now you can do 2 things. You can either jump into the middle of the road and go, fucking come on then. And you can do battle with it, and you can fully immerse yourself in it and grapple with it. Or you can go, oh yeah, look, sadness is here now, or anger is here now. It's up to me whether I want to fully engage in it. Yeah. You know, or I can appreciate that this too shall pass. Yeah. It will.
I love that
go.
saying. I absolutely love that saying.
It will move past me. How did you stop sliding, and then how did you start recognizing that this too shall pass?
Well, initially I couldn't stop sliding, and that's where I slid into the overdose essentially. But I think the hard work really started. I came out of hospital, and just for anyone who's watching who goes, well, how did you survive? I don't remember. And it turned out that I had called 911 at 10 to 1 in the morning, and that phone call had saved my life. And I don't recall it, don't remember it at all. And I think that's where there's a will inside us all to survive. And no matter how dark and deep a hole you're in, there is something inside us all that will want you to survive. And that phone call genuinely saved my life. So I came out of hospital 4 days later, and I remember feeling really euphoric and kind of going, oh my God, I've dodged a bullet there. I'm never going to do that again. Life's going to be, the only way is up. It's not going to get worse than the day you try to kill yourself. And the truth of the matter...
What did you feel like when you woke up in hospital? Sorry.
So confused. So again, I had no idea. I couldn't breathe. I had this tube down my throat, and I kept trying to pull the tube out. And they put me back to sleep again. And then they brought me around again. They kept saying, Elizabeth, you've survived. You're okay. You're in hospital. You've been brought in. And then they eventually removed the tube. So it was just, when you're a recovering addict, but when you drink too much and you don't remember waking up the next morning, you're like, you've got the beer fear. Mm-hmm. It was like that times 100. You're like, I don't know why.
Yeah, but then for me, it's when someone then tells me
all the other stuff you did.
Pete, we found the needles.
Oh, yeah.
Or we found this. What did it feel like when someone said, Liz, we know you tried to kill yourself?
Well, it was a really hard topic to kind of cover. I mean, the hardest moment of the time in hospital, there's no two ways about it, was my little brother arrived. And I've got two brothers. I've got an older one and a younger one. But when my little brother arrived at hospital, he was the first one to get there. And seeing his face when he came around the curtain, that for me is everything about suicide, because that said, his face was so emotionally distraught, so searching of questions. Just he had no idea what had happened and and he'd been living with me until about a month before. So he was just searching for all these answers of what he could have done to stop the outcome. And that for me, his little face will stay with me forever. But I think, I then came out of hospital, and then that's when, although despite feeling really euphoric at the start and going, well, the only way is up, it can't get any worse than that. Oh my God, I was so wrong. And that's when the wheels really started to come off, because I think, the day of the overdose, yes, I tipped over the can and all the worms had come out, or as I always refer to it, I'd thrown all the files in my brain everywhere that day. I think the biggest battle now was to start putting them all back again and where they needed to be, and almost putting life back together. And that was extremely difficult. So I was really adverse to going on antidepressants for obvious reasons, because I tried to kill myself on them, but eventually realised, kind of like in September, about a month or so later, realised that actually, and when someone explained to me how antidepressants work, and actually that when your fight or flight response is switched on, which it will be for lots of people listening to this as firefighters, and I'm sure you do the same, and certainly as soldiers, our fight or flight response is switched on nearly all the time. And the fact that I went to Herrick and then came back and went to back again and came back, mine never really switched off for about 10 years. And whenever your brain is in that response mechanism, it actually pumps out different chemicals, which is what it needs to do, so that basically the lion comes in the room, you run towards the lion or the fire, you don't run out the other door, or you go towards the fight, you go towards saving the casualty. So it pumps out chemicals into your brain to try and make your brain do that, because it's overriding your natural reasoned thought, which is run the fuck away. And basically, I'd had like 10 years of this extra chemicals being pumped into my brain. And someone explained that if antidepressants will level out your brain chemical, don't see them as this like happy pill or something like that. It's about how you're leveling your brain chemicals. So reluctantly, I went on antidepressants in September. And, I think it's maybe a forces thing as well. I just didn't want to be on any medication. And actually, about a year or so later, I thought I was getting better, but I thought, is it a placebo effect? I still hadn't really found my mojo. I wasn't back training at the gym much. I was really struggling to find the joy in anything in life. And then I got put on a different medication after having a really open chat with someone about antidepressants, funny enough. And that sparked them to say, maybe try this one. And again, if we are not open about talking about mental health and antidepressants and take away that taboo, it was that conversation meant that I went on to a different antidepressant called citalopram, and it was brilliant and it really helped me. And I kind of within 3 months was back to my normal self and wanting to go to the gym, enjoying, life again. And I think, that's where we need to take away that stigma, because it's only those open conversations you have with people. Well, you'll find out that somebody else is really struggling. And, I always have this thing in life where I think there's somebody worse off than me. I've done the escape and evasion training, same as you, and, standing pressing against a wall and waiting to go in interrogation. I remember thinking, well, at least none of my limbs are falling off, or at least, somebody is going through this the second time around. There's always somebody worse than you.
That's what makes it a very useful spectrum when people talk about things that are really difficult. I met a friend of mine, and again, it's just so many different ways to interpret how good or bad your life is or isn't. I met a friend of mine over Christmas. They just had their new daughter, just giving birth, and their daughter was born blind.
Yeah.
And they hadn't thought to tell me, which is fine, because it's just like, whatever, it's a new baby. And after I've met it, and I know friends that are struggling with cancer. I was at a decontamination seminar, and firefighters are 4 times as likely as the general public to get cancer and all this sort of stuff. And several of my friends that have retired have got it. And again, just this little girl, and it made me come home and look at my kids and go, none of you are blind.
Yeah, I'm so thankful. I'm
like, wow, yeah, my life's the worst version of my life. Still pretty fucking great. Today's podcast is powered by our partner Lifelines and their revolutionary approach to functional hydration. Just like in firefighting, water is essential for body function, but studies show more than 80% of firefighters are dehydrated. A 25-year study findings from the National Institute of Health showed poor hydration to be linked to early aging and chronic disease, and even mild dehydration results in significant negative impact outcomes, including headaches, exhaustion, rapid pulse, irritability, and poor cognitive function. A study conducted by Yale University showed that participants who were just 1% dehydrated had a 12% increase in errors when performing tasks that required cognitive flexibility. In addition, dehydration is shown to worsen mood and attitude, contribute to confusion and poor decision making, and negatively affect memory and judgment. In other words, you really don't want your incident commander, firefighter, or for that matter any first responder on a critical scene to be even slightly dehydrated. Mild dehydration occurs when a person is just 1.5% dehydrated, a condition that does not even trigger the thirst response in most people. So just imagine how quickly a firefighter or any first responder can and does become dehydrated in their day-to-day duties, which is why I address my hydration first thing every day with Lifelines. Go into the notes for this episode and specifically check out Lifelines Hydro Fuel and Hydro OG by clicking in the notes for the podcast for a clean energy solution designed for those who demand more from their day. Now back to the show.
Now the more I talk about my struggles, because you were saying about how do you dig your heels in and stop that downward trend. The truth is it's really difficult. Even in the November after the first overdose, I had another meltdown moment coming up to Remembrance Week, which I always find really hard. I had more suicidal thoughts. I was thinking about jumping in front of a car.
I remember I saw the post that you put about that, because people were asking you where you're going to be and if you're coming here and there, and there's like this, you're such a public figure and you've written an amazing book, and it's like
I really struggle. Yeah, and but in November 21 specific, or 2020 specifically, so only 3 months after the first overdose, I was considering jumping in front of a car again at one point when I was out walking in November, and I scared myself so much. That's when I rang the GP, and then they upped my meds. So I do think, if you're really in that downward spiral of depression, do genuinely get actual help and potentially take medication, because it does work, and there's so much stigma around it. But then whenever I was back on a level playing field, I'm a massive advocate, and we've already mentioned it once or twice today, movement for mental health. Get moving, get walking. And I used to again run as a solo sport. I was a lone animal. I'd run, I'd swim, and I'd cycle, and I'd do it all on my own. I hated talking to people when I was training because it was my headspace. And now I get more value out of an hour's walk with friends, just decompressing, just chatting and sharing just giggles, than I ever do going for a run for an hour thrashing myself.
There's loads of walk and talk stuff in the fire service now and mental health groups, but is it something to do with the way that we brand health, wellbeing, fitness, whatever it might be? Because you're totally right, and I certainly agree with you. It's like you're talking into an open door. It's you can't separate the mind from the body. But when you say to somebody who's really struggling, who perhaps has not had that gift of falling in love with some sort of physical activity, whether that be sport, gym, swimming, walking a dog, whatever, and you say, hey, try this thing, and they're like, Liz, I'm not asking for your fucking fitness advice, I'm telling you I'm struggling. Like, it's how would you navigate that for people that perhaps might be listening that aren't into fitness?
I got asked this one time last year in a talk, and it was like probably one of the hardest questions I've ever been asked. And I thought, how do you help someone who just doesn't want to be helped? And I genuinely think this works, is that put it back on you. Say, look, I really need help. Even if you're not struggling, you can dress up the smallest problem you have and make it sound like you're really struggling, and say, look, I'm really struggling at the minute. I could really do with a friend. Would you come with me to this? And would you come walking? And actually, that is more than likely going to get that person to come out with you, because they'll be like, oh, they need me. And actually, when you start opening up about your stuff, even if it's really small, they'll be like, oh, I'm actually really struggling too. And that's when you push the door open, it's a two-way street, and they will start walking through it with you. And I think coming away from like this alpha male thing where everyone has to play this like I'm okay thing, the more people admit that they're not okay, it opens that door for the people that really genuinely aren't okay, and they will start talking about their problems. And it's worked for me. I tend to find that some of my friends who really don't want to talk about their stuff, but actually if I say, look, I'm having a really bad week again, any chance you could, pop in for a brew, I just need to speak to someone. And actually when they get here, they start to open up. So I think making yourself vulnerable is the best way to get your friends to open up.
I think I need to do a bit more of that. I'm being totally honest now, because a few people have asked me in the past few months if I'm dealing okay with something else we've got going on. And I'm like, yeah, I'm cool. And they're like, hey, let's meet up for a coffee. And at times, total hands up guilty, I've been like, nah, that's cool. I think I'm all right, but really appreciate the offer.
Yeah.
Maybe they weren't asking for
you.
me.
Yeah. And I always say to people,
that's a bit of a dick move. I'm gonna follow up on that today. I'm making a personal note for myself. You're giving me a great piece of self-reflection there, because like you say, sometimes that is people asking for help themselves, just don't know how to ask.
And I mean, I do think I certainly tend to have this tendency to isolate myself now whenever I'm not in a good headspace, and I'm very aware I do it. So it's definitely a tendency. But I also say this in all the talks I do now, is the two kind of takeaways is always ask someone twice how they are, because we are very good at hard boiling eggs in the military and in the fire service. You hard boil people inside to deal with everything, but we're not very good at reversing that process. And therefore, if someone is struggling and you ask them how they are, 9 times out of 10, they will not want to talk about it. They'll try and get the spotlight off them straight away. And they'll be like, yeah, I'm living the dream. How are you? More importantly, is always a classic that I do. And actually, if someone asks me twice, like, how are you really? Sometimes it's just enough to crack the eggshell. So I always say to people, ask someone twice how they are. And the other thing I always do now is give my mental health a number out of 10. Coming back, we were saying about, the train thing or the weather. Some people use weather analogies. I use numbers, and I say, I'm 3 out of 10 today. And you tell people I'm a 3 out of 10. I don't really want to talk about it. I don't want to tell you why, but I just know that I'm a 3 out of 10. Then you can kind of keep an eye on your friends a bit better. You can also measure your own mental health a bit better. I know if I'm a 3 for about a week running, I need to probably do something about it, get moving, for example. But I think it's really good for families, really good to go home on a night time, sit with your kids, having dinner and go, right, what's everyone's number tonight? But you've got to be authentic. And the most authentic thing you can do as a father is go, do you know what? I'm about a 2 today, because then the kids see that you're human, and then they can ask why, and you can explain stuff, and maybe that opens up some lessons too. But you've got to be authentic about it. But I think kids should do it. I think corporate companies should put it on their emails. I just think everyone should start talking about the numbers of their mental health.
I stopped myself so much from interrupting you there, because there's so much I wanted to agree with you on. So I'm gonna not attempt to one up you, but I heard a great one probably 10 years ago. And it came from another business book. But I use that same thing, but I say you're not allowed to use 7. So I'm like, how's your mental health out of 10? Not allowed to use number 7. Because 7 is a cop-out. I always think 7's a cop-out. 7's like, oh, well, that's pretty good. It's not great, but it's kind of okay. 6 is an admittance. There's a gap of 4 here, so something's niggling me. And at 8, some people aren't audacious enough to claim an 8 because they're like, well, I'm not on cloud 9.
Yeah.
Or I ask people when they do offer a 6 or a 5 or a 4, I go, right, what would a 6 look like? And they'll go, well, I'm struggling with this thing that I'd love to just get boxed off. I'd love to just get it resolved. Do you know what I mean? Because understanding where their spectrum starts and finishes, because if someone says, oh, I'm a 3, okay, what would a 1 look like? Yeah. Oh, Jesus, a 1 is I'm hanging on by my teeth because at least I've got this and this. And you've unknowingly encouraged them to reframe appreciation and gratitude. Because if they're saying they're a 3, they're also acknowledging that life has not completely come apart of the threats. And I'm like, what would a 1 look like? Well, my husband's still with me and my kids are safe. And
you just that positive language, even getting people to say those positive things of what is good in their life. People are very good at saying what's gone bad and what's wrong, but we're not very good at going, but I've still got a roof over my head. And, I look back at the day of my overdose and I think of how dark a place I was in that mindset day, and I felt so alone, so isolated and so lacking in purpose. Well, the truth is, I was in an apartment and I'd survived COVID. I hadn't got COVID. I hadn't lost anyone to COVID, and I still had a roof above my head. So there's so much that was good, but I just couldn't see it. And I wasn't having those positive conversations with people because nobody was having conversations with people, and it was all, the whole world was very doom and gloom. Um, there's a thing about the vagus nerve. I don't know if you've heard about the vagus nerve, but the vagus nerve is a nerve well, the back of the brain, I think, and you can trick it. You can trick your vagus nerve into feeling happy. And there's lots of psychology around, waking up in the morning and genuinely smiling in the mirror and saying some really positive things, and you can generally lift your mood just by, it's the same, you go into a work interview or a business interview, that mirror behavior technique that they teach you, if somebody does something, you do it back to them. More
Mirroring,
likely,
yeah. That's why it works in a mirror. So it stimulates your
parasympathetic
parasympathetic
nerve,
nervous system.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so crucial because you can sell yourself on it. We are fantastic salespeople. Like if I said to you, Liz, there's a guy behind this curtain and he's having a really shit day. He's really, really depressed. What do you think he looks like? You'd be able to describe, I bet he's got sloped shoulders. I bet he's looking at the ground. I bet he's a bit, I bet he's got his hands in his pockets. Or I bet and you can sell yourself on how to feel better, how to look better. And that's why I always say to my wife, like, and I always say to her, posture, because it's always like, you turn yourself, baby, from a 7 to a 9 immediately, just by looking up and putting your shoulders back.
Yeah, and I think that's where, again, COVID really hit people, because COVID, everyone, like if I, again, coming back to the dog walking thing, if I go out for a dog walk, even if I don't speak to someone will smile at me and I will smile back, and you force yourself to smile. But in COVID, everyone's faces were covered and we couldn't see those smiles. And it sounds really simplistic, but it's true. We weren't seeing people smiling. So we weren't smiling, and that whole vagus nerve parasympathetic response was just...
I'm interested in the long-term effect that's had on children ages, 2 to 4 that were born around that time, that hugely developing part of their cognition and the way they see the world, and everyone had masks on. I think that will be a thing. I bet that'll manifest into some sort of diagnosis in 15 years' time. They go, oh yeah, well, you were COVID, baby. Yeah, well, you're
you
fucked.
Look at dogs. People that got dogs in COVID, I see all the time now, like puppy classes being spun up again for COVID dogs, because COVID dogs did not socialise with other dogs, and they're always really like yappy and bitey because they're not used to it. And it's, that's again, almost... whatever happens with a dog is going to be the same with children, it's that like lack of interaction with other kids and all that kind of stuff. So I think, everyone's COVID was different, and it's so funny because I speak to, my best mate, she got into boxing training just before COVID, and she changed her whole life around in COVID. She started running, she started doing boxing training in the garden, and she dropped a load of weight and absolutely changed her life. And I was that girl going into COVID who was smashing PBs, who had a really decent bike. I should have gone on the same route. I should have picked the road to the left and done the successful road, of like all this really cool triathlon training. I'm such a lone shark when it comes to that anyway, but something switched, and somehow I end up going down the tunnel instead. And I think it's really fascinating to see how everyone's COVIDs were so different.
Oh, absolutely. You last year won, so we were speaking earlier about the imposter syndrome and encouraging people to share. I always say to people that your mess is your message. So most people that think about talking about their story, and this actually what makes it hard with a first responder or military, people on the front line style podcast, because unlike yourself, most of these incredible people, and you'll have met far more than me, have such amazing stories, but they'll probably never write them down. They may never have the self-belief or the courage to write a book as you have. And there's so many incredible people, and they often feel that their life is a bit of a mess. And I'm like, yeah, but that's it. Your mess is your message. Like, how did you... Because I always love finding books like yours, and we'll put a link underneath here so people can go and find it themselves. Books like yours. There's another one, Scott. What's Scott's last name? In fact, you posted about it recently.
Scotty Mills.
Yeah, another great. His is on audio as well. Fucking great thing. These stories, and they're not just exhausting. Oh, this is what like Hell Week was like for me. The people have got over that shit. I think Goggins has done that to death, in a great way. But the rest of the career, because after basic training, everyone spins off into different pathways and different journeys. Last year, you won the Defence Woman of the Year. Another big thing to load onto the shoulders of this imposter syndrome. Like, how would you help encourage other people to share their stories? Because, like you alluded to earlier, if we show a little bit about the struggles that we've been through, they almost act like footholds on a climbing wall for people to connect with you. Because if you just appear like this glistening, shiny steel perfection. Well, it's like I can't connect with that, Liz, because my life's a clusterfuck, you know. But when you show that, oh yeah, I've actually had a bit of a mess as well, and that's what you talk about, and you talk about it so powerfully.
Oh, thank you. Well, I think, you know, be vulnerable and be authentic. And whenever I was as a crewman, when I still had all my shit together and I was a crewman instructor, you know, I was smashing life. I was smashing my career. I was on the promotion ladder. And the other female crewmen that were kind of in amongst the fold never used to want to come and ask me questions, because they were like, you know, Liz is Wonder Woman. She's got all of her shit squared away. You know, she doesn't ever fail. And I was really hard not to come and approach, because people genuinely just were almost intimidated by me a little bit, even though I think I'm quite, I was always still the same way. I was quite bubbly and gregarious, but because I had everything squared away and I was on it, people didn't want to come and ask questions, because they were just too worried it'd be a stupid one. And actually, you know, the more I open up in the book about my authentic struggles, and, you know, that not every day is great, that's the bit. Even when I started on the speaking circuit, you know, I had a slide deck of like 26 slides or something, and 20 of them were about my time in the forces, and 6 of them were about my kind of struggles afterwards. And then every time I'd ask for questions, all the questions were about everything since, you know, leaving the military and the struggle bit.
Yeah.
So now my presentation is like, you know, 50-50, and it keeps sliding left. You know, it's like this Doppler effect. There's more, people find the real human stuff way more easy to connect with, because the truth is, it doesn't matter what job you've got on the planet. You know, you can be a city banker in London. You can be a war junkie like I was. You could be whatever. You could be an accountant. The thing that we all have in common is mental health. And that's where I think the struggles you open up about your mental health, everyone in the room, like 100 people in that room can connect with that. Whether or not I'm talking to a school group, whether or not I'm talking to a bunch of nurses, talking to a load of corporates, a women's knitting group, everybody's got mental health. And that's where I think, you know, for anyone who is even thinking about writing a book, I get asked all the time about advice about writing a book, and I think writing is the most cathartic thing I find. It's not necessarily going to be the same for everyone, but I find it a really good outlet. And I wrote my book with no intention of anyone ever reading it. It just stayed on my laptop for, you know, it was written in 3 weeks. It just then got stored in a folder on my laptop, and it was only my mate encouraged me to send it off to some publishers. So, you know, for anyone out there, just start writing stuff down, even if it's a couple of poems, even if it's just a couple of lines, even if it's a letter to someone that you've lost. Write stuff down and just store it somewhere, or rip it up, do whatever. But the writing it down really gets out of your head, and you never know. You know, same as me, it could become a book in 3 years' time. Who knows?
Doing it for yourself, and I say writing the book that you wish existed when you needed it as well. And I always say, and of course I would say this, as you've said with books, I encourage people to start a podcast, even if it never goes anywhere. Just sit down with a friend and put your phone on record and place it in between you. Even if you don't have to put it on fucking YouTube. You haven't got to start a proper podcast. But the self-reflective manner. Yeah. And it just forces you to, I always say, if you get stuck in your head, you're dead. Do you know what I mean? Taking things out of your head, writing them down, speaking them aloud, bringing them into existence, because now it exists in a thing. And like, I've had so much self-awareness and reflection when I'll listen back to our conversation. I know I'll continue to be frustrated because I'm like, oh yeah, look, you kept interrupting Liz, like you fucking said you weren't going to, you know, because I just get so excited. I'm terrible. I always try and be a better conversationalist, but I get so excited and I want to like verbally high-five you as you're talking, and end up interrupting. But they're great self-awareness pieces.
Yeah, they really
and again,
are.
I think your book has reached so many people. I mean, it was within 3 weeks, it was like an Amazon bestseller. And again, we will put the links below here for people. What's the best way for people to reach out to you if they wanted to? How would you prefer? Where's the best place to get the book? Where's the best place to connect with you? And also, the book was just a thing you did once. You are still kicking ass, taking names, turning over new stones. So I don't want us to totally reflect solely on that. So where's the best place to find you, and what's exciting you now? What's tickling your pickle? What are you doing?
Well, I think the proudest thing about the book is the fact that, you know, I think this is a message for everyone, is that PTSD is a chapter of the book. You know, it's a chapter of my life, but it's not my whole like label going forward. It doesn't have to be an anchor around my feet forever, and it doesn't have to be a label I wear on my chest. You know, I think too many people who have had PTSD kind of wallow in that label forever. And, you know, I've got people that follow me called the broken soldier.
Well, you get audience capture as well, don't you?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh yeah, Liz talks about a thing. No, that was a chapter of Liz's life once.
And there are, so, you know, the book is a really strong message of like positivity, that you can have that. And with the right people, tools, support around you, movement for mental health, you can recover from PTSD and kind of move on. Don't get me wrong, I still have good days and bad days, but that's not necessarily PTSD, it's just life, and that's mental health again, you know, good and bad days. But I think, yeah, I'm still writing lots. I've done a couple of kids' stories that I'm hoping to get out at some point soon, and then all to do with doggies, because I was saying my little doggy saved my life, I think. And I think, you know, I will write a sequel to the Chinook crew chick, because it is just exploded. And my life, you know, like I look back at it like 2 years ago, it's just gone mental. You know, I've been on TV things. I've met some incredible people. I've been doing some incredible speaking gigs. I've had a stalker. I've had all sorts of issues about, you know, all of those things.
No way.
Yeah, all of those things. Like, I had to get the police involved and everything, but all of those things kind of add to the flavour of life.
Is it one of those like, oh, you spoke to me, Liz?
Yeah,
I felt like it was.
And he'd followed me home and everything, was driving around my apartment, and I hadn't noticed for 3 months. But off the back of that, you know, these things are sent to add to the flavour of life, aren't they? And at the time, I really crumbled. And weirdly, I think it's because I was in my safe space, which is my house, and suddenly I felt very, very vulnerable in my own space. But it's a chapter of the book, you know, it'll be a chapter of the next book. And all these things at the time feel like the worst thing that can ever happen to you. And I've realised, I guess, the hard way, that actually all those things that you think are the worst thing that will ever happen actually can be the lessons that will make you stronger for the next battle. And I talk a lot about resilience, and I think it's the most banded around word on the planet. You know, people banned this word about resilience all the time, and I misunderstood it. I thought resilience meant unbreakable, and every time I would be told I was resilient in the forces, I'd be like, yeah, I'm unbreakable, I can do more, and kept going to war. And the truth is, resilience really means falling, bending, breaking, and using those lessons to come back stronger for the next battle, you know, bolting them on for armour. And I all those things I've learned in the last 18 months, the highs, the lows, the incredible people I've met, and the lessons I've taken away from podcasts even, will all be added to the next chapter of the next books. So yeah, I'm just going to keep doing that.
There's so much there. My God, there's like, my brain again is just rifling through, because everything you're doing now, I see it as like post-traumatic growth.
Yeah.
You know, that's what's happening here. And like, there's also a book that speaks about anti-fragile as well, when it's like that different reframing from what you just said there about resiliency. Resiliency is not bulletproof, never breaks. It's becoming anti-fragile.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like I've tore my whole pec off. I've prolapsed discs in my back and all this sort of stuff. And I've built up a lot of scar tissue. And scar tissue, you'll never re-tear it where you tore it before, because there's so much scar tissue. You might tear it somewhere else because it creates a vulnerability. But that bit's almost becomes bulletproof, and that's the anti-fragile aspect that I hear you speaking about.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, I'm pretty much, I'm on LinkedIn, but Chinny Chick or Chinook Crew Chick, just Google that and you'll find me somewhere. Probably under your sofa. I'm pretty much everywhere at the minute. So, yeah. Look,
I thank you so much for being so generous with your time this morning. I know you've got some more commitments this morning, and I know you need to get out there with your dog as well this morning, but some more love to everybody, some more love to the pooch, and thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Pete. It's been brilliant telling.
The Firefighters podcast was created to recognize, acknowledge, inspire, and hopefully even motivate these incredible individuals who have chosen to be part of the first responder community. Our driving purpose is to create a legacy resource for the current and future generations of firefighters and first responders. We get some incredible feedback from listeners and guests, and as the podcast grows, our desire to create longevity and sustainability means that we are asking for the support of our listeners. If you want to support the podcast, if you want to get discounts to our merchandise, hoodies, clothing, coins, patches, tallies, and also access to all of the incredible documents get shared with us from our podcast guests and sector leaders, then please head over to our Patreon page, and for just £3 a month, you can support the future of the podcast. Please finally hit that follow, subscribe, or rate button on the platform you're listening, and wherever you're around the world, please support your emergency services responders, and thank you for listening.